of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society here for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time. And I hope that you find the lecture informative and also enlightening. Now, I apologise for being late. It's not my fault for a delay on the trains. I do remember going to another university, giving a talk on jihad. And I actually went to the toilet and then stupidly left my bag on the seat. And when I came out, everyone was in a panic, screaming, going, "What's that bag doing there?" They stopped the train. And I was thinking, man, if they open up my bag and find out my speech and they see jihad, I'm in big trouble. So, so don't eat if you're Muslim and you've got a rucksack, don't eat your bag on the train, make sure you take it with you. That's my advice for this evening. So, the purpose of life. Does man need God? Socrates is noted to have said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And to examine one's life is to ask those questions about identity. Who am I? What am I doing here? What's the point of it all? Now, imagine you were going to your class, you're on your way to Warwick University, your usual route, and you were knocked unconscious. And then you awoke and you found yourself in some foreign land, in the middle of the desert, let's say. What would be the first questions that you would ask yourself? What am I doing here? Yes. Where am I going? Who brought me here? What's going on here? What's this all about? Now, those questions are important to the one that is lost. But these are extremely important questions regarding our own existence. Now, if we fail to answer those questions, we will be eternally lost. Now, I, for one, don't believe that we're, how can we put it, cosmic orphans, but we do have meaning and ultimate purpose for our existence. Those questions of identity, who am I, what am I doing, what's the point of it all can be answered by a simple question and a simple answer. But before I expand upon that, what if I don't believe in God? Can I have ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose in my life? Can I have those things if I don't believe in God? Does it even matter that I don't have ultimate meaning and purpose? Does man need God in his life? Carl Sagan, the noted atheist astronomer, in his book Pale Blue Dot, concentrates on the image taken 4 billion miles away from the Voyager spacecraft. And he says this. He says, because of the reflection of sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light as if there was some special significance to this world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our imagined self-importance, the delusion of some prevalent position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in a great and developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all its vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. He also says, who are we? We find that we live in an insignificant planet on a 100 star lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe, in which there are far more galaxies than people. Stephen Hawking has also described man as a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet. So this chemical scum, feeling all happy now, chemical scum resides in a universe that is forever expanding. Science tells us that the universe is expanding, and one day it will come to an end. As it continues to expand, it moves further and further apart. It becomes colder and colder. All of the stars, all of the energy will be used up and destroyed. There will be no light, there will be no heat, and there will be no life. Not only do each and every one of us in this room pass out of existence, but the entire human race is doomed to destruction. Now, tell me this. In a horrific scenario such as this, how do we conjure up some kind of notion to hold, some kind of notion of meaning when this is all that we have? What have we got to hold on to? Now, some of you may say, this is rather harsh, because I am very important to my life. I am important to people. I'm important because of my position. But I just asked a simple question. If everything is going to be doomed to destruction, then what does it matter what you influence in your life? It may be the contributions to science, the research of the doctor to alleviate human pain and suffering, the efforts to secure peace in the world, to develop a new cough medicine, the sacrifices for others, the conquering of lands, the building illustrious, magnificent buildings that we can be inspired by, writing a bestseller, to establish a family, to accumulate a fortune, to strive for further progress and prosperity, the long hours of studies, our friends, our families. All of this is utterly meaningless. We attach meaning to these things in hope to transcend death. But in the end, it all amounts to nothing. It's utterly pointless. Why? Because if our lives are ultimately pointless and meaningless, then whatever we fill our lives with will amount to be meaningless. But don't take my word for it. What do the great atheist minds, what do they see when they look at the world? Well, for example, take Voltaire. This is what he said when he saw the world. He said, he saw a worm crawling on the earth, and the bird going and destroying the worm and consuming it. Then he saw the eagle coming and destroying that bird. Then he saw a human being take his gun and shoot the eagle apart, and then the human being meets his fellow human being on the battlefield and killing one another, and that worm enters the human being's body and devours it. He says the miseries of each are supposed to make up the good of all. The atheist philosopher, Bertrand Russell, he said this, that man is a product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his love, his beliefs are but the outcomes of accidental co-locations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve the individual beyond the grave. That all the labours of all the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. This is a depressing picture of man, but it is terribly consistent. Take this as an example. There are computer games where we can put a lot of time into, where we can build friendships, families, develop careers, become kings and queens, rule armies, and conquer other lands. But I ask you this, when we turn the power off, those days, those months, and even years of gameplay, do they amount to anything? No, absolutely not. Zero. In the same way, if life just ends at the grave, it has nothing beyond it, then man is like a criminal man who is sentenced to death, just killing time before his execution. That is what our life will be without God. So it does not make a difference whether you exist or do not exist, when there is no ultimate purpose. So what about ultimate purpose? Do we have ultimate purpose? If we don't believe in God, do we have ultimate purpose in our lives? Well, I don't think so. Why? Because if God does not exist, then the universe is a cosmic accident. Then what of man? Man is nothing more than a freak of nature. He is a product of a lengthy evolutionary process, who has no goal, who has no purpose. So, is there no reason for life? If God does not exist, is there no reason for the existence of human beings? Well, yes. I mean, listen to Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist from Harvard, the late Stephen Jay Gould. Listen to what he said. This is what he says why human beings are here. He says, We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. He said, because comets struck the Earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available. So thank your lucky stars in a literal sense, because the Earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa a quarter of a million years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We yearn, listen to his words, we may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. So man is just a product of a process, a long, cruel process. That's all he is. All that man is, as some scientists have described, is a computer made from flesh. All that you are. Take a little bit of chance, a little bit of time, and a few atoms, then you have man. That's all that you are. Qualitatively, your life has as much purpose as a rat's life. And some can even argue that bacteria have more purpose than you lot. If God does not exist, if we do not have ultimate purpose. Indeed, this is why the existentialist philosopher Albert Camus, he said, and when he was confronted with the utter meaninglessness of what he saw in the world, he recognized that man needed this. Then when he looked at the world and he saw a mismatch, this is what he said. He says, there is but one true, serious philosophical question, that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to the most important fundamental question of philosophy. Why the hell should we carry on living? What's the point of it? So, brothers and sisters, my friends, how does modern man continue when he's confronted with the absurdity of life? How can he just ignore these problems? Can he just put them at the back of his mind and carry on living his life? I don't think so. And what's interesting, around 20 years ago, in Psychology Today, there was an article by Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. And what he did was to look at the baby boomer generation, the 1960s generation, and to analyze that generation. And he discovered that that single generation had an increase in depression by tenfold. So in that single generation span, there was a 10 times increase in the number of people suffering from depression. And he said that if we had that kind of increase with respect to, say, heart disease, it would be considered an epidemic. Now, then he asked the interesting question, why? Why was there this seismic shift in the number of people suffering from depression? And the answers were astonishing. He discovered that that generation lost how to relate their lives to something greater than themselves. That a greater cause, a bigger purpose in their lives beyond themselves. And he says, Seligman says, that what happened was when they believed that their lives were no longer true and wasn't part of some bigger picture, they became narcissistic. That they started to worship themselves. They started to live according to only themselves. And he says that anybody who does that will become a very, very depressed person. So this question of purpose and meaning will not go away. It will haunt us. It will catch up with us in some shape or form. So the lack of meaning and purpose in our lives is inescapable, brothers and sisters. My friends, we must address these issues. Now we have to understand something, that this problem, this dilemma that psychologists and sociologists are discovering it within our societies is relatively a new problem, a blip in the history of man. Because up until the 15th century, it was inconceivable not to base your life with God in the background. When man looked at the world to address any kind of problem, let's say political problem, or ethical problem, or metaphysical problem, God was always assumed in the background. But then we had the Enlightenment. Then we had the Enlightenment. And for the first time, it became intellectually and culturally possible to become an atheist. So at the Enlightenment movement, man felt repressed by God, felt constrained by God, and wanted to rid himself of the shackles of religion. He did so, but it came with a price. And despite people's attempts to explain away the longings of the heart for something beyond ourselves, some transcendence, there is no joy. I want to say this to all of you here, whether you're Muslim, whether you're non-Muslim, whatever persuasion you follow, that if you do not have God in your lives, or if you do not embrace God wholeheartedly, something else will come into that void and fill it, and become a counterfeit God. I guarantee you. I will guarantee you that. When we think of idolatry, what is conjured in the mind is of primitive man bowing down to some kind of idol. And we know from the Western culture, the Greco-Roman culture, that there were many, many idols. Each were worshipped with a shrine around them in every city. And we know from the Islamic tradition, the pre-Islamic period, that there were over 360 idols. And each idol would represent a tribe, and they would worship this idol to honor their lineage and their heritage. So you would have in Makkah, for example, a totem which would represent a deity. And there is a tradition from Umar ibn Khattab, who is one of the great companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he speaks of two incidences, one which makes him cry, one which makes him laugh. What's useful for us this evening is the one that made him laugh. Umar ibn Khattab, before he was Muslim, he was going on a journey, and as they did in those days, they would bless the journey so they could procure blessings. But unfortunately, Umar ibn Khattab didn't have an idol at the time, so he looked around, and the only thing that he could find was a date. So he thought, okay, this will be my God today, my idol. So he put the dates around him, and he went on the journey, all happy. But what happened was, during the journey, he became really, really hungry. And he couldn't find anything to eat. So what he effectively did was to take the dates and eat the dates and effectively eat his God. Now, for us, that seems a bit peculiar, a bit weird. But if we analyze our societies and our communities, we will find that our societies are not that different from those ancient ones. But we have our own idols in our communities and our societies. You know, each of us have our priesthoods, our totems, our rituals. We all have our shrines, whether they are in the gym, the studio, our tower blocks. You know, we have our own shrines in our lives, and we make sacrifices in those locations, in those shrines, in order to procure the blessings of a good life and to ward off disaster. Now, what is an idol at the end of the day? An idol is something where we want to achieve something, to attain something from it that only God can provide. And that if we do not have that, idol, then we fall into despair. That it is utterly central to our life. Now, in a secular age where beauty and power and money and achievement have assumed mythic proportions in our individual lives and societies, they have become elevated to idols in our lives. Now, we may not physically bow down to, for example, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, the Greco-Roman god, but tell me this: how many women go through the pain and suffering, agonize over their appearance, and spend inordinate amounts of time and money in looking a certain way? How many women have been driven into bulimia and anorexia? There was a study recently asked a number of women, I think it was Grazia magazine, and they asked the question. They said, what would you prefer, to be fat or to be hit by a truck? And a ridiculous number of women, I think approximately 50%, said they'd rather be hit by a truck. Now, folks, that means they would rather die than to be overweight, than to be fat. I mean, this is a serious, serious problem we have in our society. One is making those sacrifices to the goddess of beauty in our lives, especially women. And what we do, stupidly, foolishly, that we judge people's appearance, we judge people's character on those values of beauty and perfection, stupidly. So what we have in our culture, where the ancient culture, or the ancient cultures used to worry about the status of their soul, if they were good people, were they being good to their neighbor, were they living a straight and honorable life, we worry about the wrinkles on our forehead and the lines under our eyes. And we have a culture which is moved from being good and doing good to looking good and feeling good. That is a seismic shift in our culture, and this is one of the reasons why we have a tremendous amount of problems. I mean, that's just one thing that I would mention. Now, also, we may not burn incense to Artemis, the god of fertility and wealth, but tell me this, when career and money are raised to cosmic proportions, do we not perform the type of child sacrifice when we neglect our children? How many women have the burden of not only looking perfect, but also having a career and also having the burden of having children? How many women are made to feel guilty that they're not career women and not have the desire to fulfill, the desire to feel the need to be mothers? How many women are under immense amounts of pressure? Of course, if they want to, they can have careers, but we shouldn't make them feel guilty. We shouldn't pressure them and make them feel somehow less of a woman if they do want to look after their children. How many fathers do not put their children to sleep at night or read them a story because they're again at one other meeting, another flight to another country to procure another deal, so they can achieve that promotion or that extra wealth in their family. So what we find in our society, that even though we don't have tangible idols, we do have those idols in our lives. And those old idols, those ancient idols, were bloodthirsty and hard to appease, and so are the new idols in our lives. And for most people, materialism, a form of spirituality, is materialism. So we no longer worship in the temple, in the synagogue, the church, or the mosque, but we worship in the mall. We're armed with our talisman, the credit card. We go out there, we authenticate our existence by buying more stuff. I buy, therefore I am. Right? How many of us do that? Retail therapy, as I said. So we are involved in this pseudo-salvation of materialism. And listen to what this sociologist says, Roger Rosenblatt, in the book.
Particular in Hamas, that it's marginalized militant radical groups in Palestine and in the Arab countries. It becomes clear that from this past participation, that militarism or using radical militant action is polar opposite of the non-violent approach. There are two completely different, extremes, and you don't need to say much when you see the millions of people in the streets in the Arab countries, that this is one way that change can be achieved. And I want to remind you that in the context, earlier on, that few military coups coups in Arab countries, none of them worked. In fact, it was easy for the regimes in Arab countries to face any military. It was easy to control it, easy to oppress trying, as you know, to do the same with when you have millions of people who go to the streets. So that's created legitimacy, I would say, to non-violence and marginalizing militant groups. I think the fact that the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza being renegotiated, partially open, was immediately after the fall of regime in Egypt, after the fall of Mubarak. And today, although it's not completely free access or for people to travel, still it's much better than it was a year ago. I think the most delicate and frightening will be influence of the Arab Spring was in the political, the challenge and of the Palestinian leadership faced. They were very concerned, very aware, in fact very shaken by what happened in the neighboring Arab countries, and they immediately, there was some changes within the Palestinian National Authority to try and appeal to this mood, and I would say, in fact, they not by accident that they, for example, charged one of important figure in Fatah was active for years in Gaza in corruption, Mohammed Dahlal. He was member of the executive committee of the Fatah, and in a way to indicate to the street that we are against, we are with transparency and against corruption. I think, you know, that's in a way to appeal to the public to calm down, you know, any potential unrest. I would say that the main weaknesses are that this protest did not have the same scale as happened in other countries. So it was limited in its impact and its influence. And I think there were few attempts. I was recently there in December talking to people, trying to understand why this has not happened. But we could come maybe in the question, in discussion, why did that not happen in Palestine. As to Israel, to Israel, it's interesting. If I was following the Hebrew press, reading what's going on, the television, and the first thing really that's happened, that it was a complete denial that this couldn't happen in the Arab world. Yeah? That the Arab regimes are used to oppress their people, and a lot of the Orientalists, or what they call in Hebrew Mizrahim, those who read and write on Arab affairs, write for Hebrew newspapers, they were completely dismissed of any changes or this phenomenon in the Arab world. Then immediately, a few weeks after that, the response was when, you know, the institution, government, journalists, and others started to realize, academics, that this is much more deeper and serious. The response was that this is dangerous for Israel. That was the first response, and the whole structures in Israel media was so busy with one thing: how this will impact, how this will affect Israel, what will happen if the Muslim Brotherhood will take over, how it will happen to Syria if the regime will fall. And in a way, which, you know, as a way of potentially stopping any communication, any smuggling, any. This is in the southern part, not in Gaza, but in the area where in Eilat. I would want to argue that Israel was actually not in favor of any of these changes, and will not be in favor of any of democratic changes in the Arab regime, for a very simple reason, that it would be much easier for Netanyahu to meet Mubarak and talk to Mubarak, and Mubarak will or to any other Arab leader, because nothing against Mubarak, but because they have the peace treaty, or Jordan for that matter, and because they meet and they cooperate quite a lot, they will not, they don't want to support any change in the Arab world, because it was easier to sit with Mubarak. Mubarak, we had no legitimacy whatsoever, or any other Arab leader, to talk about Israel violation of human rights, for example, in the West Bank, or Israel continuation of building settlements, or Israel violation of lack of not recognizing the Palestinian rights. How a leader who had no credibility, and we are human beings, will leaders meet? They know that Mubarak had no credibility in the street. So it was, how can one go and argue for, put pressure on Israel, yeah, to stop these violations, to stop the killing, to stop the building of settlements, to stop all regulations and laws that racist in its nature? How can you argue that? How an Arab leader who had no credibility and does oppress, persecute, violate, arrest their own opposition, can go and talk to Israeli leaders who want you to stop to do that for the Palestinians? Yeah. So on that basis, I think Israel was not interested and don't actually want to promote democracy in the Arab world, because for Israel, the main argument was for years that Israel is the only star in the Middle East in the darkness of Arabs. So in a way, that does not fit with the image that Israel is building, to the West particularly, and was very comfortable for years with these dictatorships. In fact, they put no effort whatsoever in supporting any democratic changes or NGOs or any work in the Arab world, not even verbally or a statement. So that's why my argument that Israel is the first one to fear democracy in the Arab world. And for that, the whole Israeli society was busy with the impact as a way of is a danger to Israel. This is also gave a new inspiration to people that feel that the democracy that can be owned by people, change that come from people is not the same democracy that being imposed by America in Iraq and other Arab parts of the Arab world. This is a different democracy that's based on participation in millions of people who go into the streets. It's, in a way, it is in a contradiction to that ideology that the Arabs are not ready and they are not mature enough for it. So we want to bring democracy to them. That's in a complete contradiction to what's happened in the Arab Spring. And also I want to be cautious, and I want to say that to you, that there is no one formula of democracy, and it would be a mistake if we would expect we will have our own understanding of democracy, and we want that to become the democracy in the Arab world. I think we need to be discussed, debated. It has to grow from there. It's not something that we can export to the Arab world. I think that civil resistance in the Arab world has questioned Israel's doctrine of militarism or using power. And this is back to my context. First point of Israel as a military power, easy for it to resolve disputes by using power. So in a way, this is taking the carpet under that doctrine of militarism or using or resolving disputes by use of force. The main really inspiration to Israelis is what's happened in Israel, where at least 300,000 people went out to the streets. I was in one of the demonstrations. People from all walks of life in Israel asking for social justice in Israel. 300,000 people. It is the largest ever demonstration in Israel. I mean, we are talking about a small country, half the population of Birmingham probably. So it's, or the Midland, it's the biggest demonstration was ever in Israel. It was against the war in Lebanon, the massacres of Beirut. And then this is the second largest demonstration was in Israel, about 300,000 people in the streets in Tel Aviv, occupying parts of Tel Aviv, and calling and demanding for social justice for their own population. I think this is inspired by their neighbors in the Arab world, and it's inspired by them seeing and watching that people actually can change situations. I think just 2 more minutes, just a few reflections on all this. Will the army hand power to civil elected government? I have doubts about this, and I think it's going to be very difficult struggle. Will Israel be happy with the changes? No. Israel, my concern, would be looking for a new confrontation in the area. In a way, finding my analysis is that it's good for Israel all the time to have an external enemy. Iran is critical in that discourse in Israel. So my fear that Israel will be looking for that, to bring that sort of glue internally. It was easy. One of the reasons that the decline of this movement inside Israel was the internal debate about settlements and reconstruction of settlements. So the minute that the focus, and you could see the government in Israel were looking for a confrontation with the Palestinians when they went to the UN, because it's like it sucked all that energy amongst people there, from looking internally to be looking externally, to look at what's happening with in this case with the UN, when the Palestinians took their case to the UN. I think there are more awareness that human security, the security of the human beings in the Middle East, is more important than militarism. People start to see that. Unfortunately, the situation in Libya and in Syria, in this case, raises questions about nonviolence or nonviolence resistance, and hindering, that approach. And I think it's I can't predict, but I can't see how a regime will continue giving all this internal opposition. South in Yemen, I think the challenge there again, there was a president, the principal there is fragile and it's very difficult to predict how it's going to go. I will stop here and I'm happy for questions, discussion, agreement or disagreement. So it don't have to be questions. If you have any comments, any contribution, is that all right?